Question 1. Strategic planning requires a professional advisor assisting a client in Mexico to obtain a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. The client expresses a desire to expedite the process and suggests omitting a minor, non-convicted altercation from their past that they believe is irrelevant to their current need for self-defense. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for the advisor? Option A. Agree to omit the incident from the application to facilitate a quicker approval, assuring the client that minor, non-convicted altercations are typically overlooked. Option B. Suggest the client seek a different advisor who may be more willing to overlook such details, implying that this advisor cannot assist with an incomplete application. Option C. Advise the client to focus solely on the immediate need for self-defense and to only provide information explicitly requested by the application form, without proactively disclosing past incidents. Option D. Advise the client that all past incidents, regardless of conviction status, must be disclosed as per Mexican firearm regulations, and explain the potential consequences of non-disclosure, while proceeding with the application based on truthful and complete information. The correct answer is D. Advise the client that all past incidents, regardless of conviction status, must be disclosed as per Mexican firearm regulations, and explain the potential consequences of non-disclosure, while proceeding with the application based on truthful and complete information. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of ethical implications, especially when dealing with regulated activities like the carrying of firearms in Mexico. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves balancing an individual's right to self-defense, as potentially recognized under Mexican law, with the stringent regulatory framework governing firearms. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the requirements for a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, particular license for the carrying of arms, while upholding ethical duties of honesty and compliance. Professional must exercise sound judgment to ensure all legal prerequisites are met without misrepresenting facts or engaging in unethical shortcuts. The correct approach involves a thorough and honest assessment of all eligibility criteria for the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas as stipulated by Mexican federal and state laws. This includes meticulously gathering all required documentation, such as proof of identity, proof of legal residence, a clean criminal record, and evidence of legitimate need for carrying a firearm, as defined by the applicable regulations. It also necessitates undergoing any mandated psychological and physical evaluations. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the spirit and letter of Mexican firearm legislation, which prioritizes public safety and responsible ownership. Ethical principles of honesty and integrity are paramount, ensuring that the application process is transparent and that the applicant genuinely meets the legal standards for carrying a weapon. This demonstrates respect for the law and the authorities responsible for its enforcement. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to expedite the process by submitting incomplete or misleading information regarding the applicant's need for a firearm. This is ethically unacceptable, as it constitutes a misrepresentation to the authorities, undermining the integrity of the licensing system. Legally, it could lead to the denial of the license, and if discovered after issuance, could result in severe penalties, including revocation of the license and criminal charges. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal channels or personal connections to bypass the formal application procedures. This is ethically problematic, as it suggests a disregard for established legal processes and could imply an attempt to gain an unfair advantage. It also fails to ensure that all legal requirements are met, potentially leaving the applicant in violation of the law. A further incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit any past incidents that might be relevant to the applicant's suitability to carry a firearm, even if those incidents did not result in a criminal conviction. This is ethically unsound due to the duty of full disclosure in such applications. Mexican law, like many jurisdictions, requires applicants to be of good conduct, and withholding relevant information, even if not explicitly a criminal offense, can be seen as a lack of transparency and a failure to meet the spirit of the law. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction. In this case, Mexico's laws regarding the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. Professionals should prioritize transparency and honesty, ensuring all information provided is accurate and complete. They should also be aware of the ethical obligations associated with regulated professions and always act in a manner that upholds the integrity of the legal and regulatory system. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel or the relevant authorities is a prudent step. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that granting a licensure particular para la Portación de Armas to an applicant who claims a generalized fear for their safety due to their profession, but provides no specific evidence of threats or prior incidents, presents a complex decision for licensing officials in Mexico. Considering the legal framework for firearm permits in Mexico, which of the following approaches best upholds professional responsibility and public safety? Option A. Deny the license outright due to the general societal concern regarding firearm violence in Mexico, without delving into the specifics of the applicant's individual circumstances. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation, seeking objective evidence to corroborate their stated need for self-defense, and assess their suitability based strictly on the legal requirements for a licensure particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico. Option C. Grant the license based on the applicant's subjective fear, as the potential benefit of self-defense outweighs any perceived risks, and the applicant's profession is inherently associated with a higher risk profile. Option D. Accept the applicant's claims at face value and issue the license, assuming that their stated fear is sufficient justification for carrying a firearm for personal protection. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation, seeking objective evidence to corroborate their stated need for self-defense, and assess their suitability based strictly on the legal requirements for a licensure particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the stringent requirements and potential risks associated with carrying a firearm in Mexico. The decision-maker must navigate the legal framework governing the licensure particular para la Portación de Armas, ensuring compliance while also making a judgment call on the applicant's suitability, which involves assessing the credibility of their stated reasons and potential for misuse. Careful judgment is required to uphold public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective evaluation of the applicant's stated need against the established legal criteria for obtaining a licensure particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico. This includes verifying the applicant's claims through available documentation and, where permissible, through discreet inquiries, while strictly adhering to the provisions of Mexican law regarding firearm permits. The justification for this approach lies in its commitment to due process, fairness to the applicant, and most importantly, the paramount importance of public safety as mandated by Mexican regulations. It ensures that licenses are issued only to those who demonstrably meet the legal requirements and pose no undue risk. An approach that prioritizes the applicant's subjective assertion of fear without independent verification or consideration of alternative security measures is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the legal standard for demonstrating a legitimate need for self-defense, as Mexican law requires more than mere apprehension. It also risks issuing a license to an individual who may not genuinely require it for protection, thereby increasing the potential for misuse of the firearm and undermining public trust in the licensing system. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to deny the license solely based on a generalized concern about the proliferation of firearms, without a specific, legally recognized reason for denial related to the applicant's individual circumstances or qualifications. While public safety is a critical consideration, decisions must be based on the applicant's failure to meet specific legal criteria, not on broad societal anxieties. This approach bypasses the established legal framework and can lead to arbitrary denials, potentially infringing on an individual's rights if they do indeed meet the legal requirements. Finally, an approach that involves accepting unsubstantiated claims without any form of due diligence or cross-referencing is also professionally unsound. This opens the door to fraudulent applications and compromises the integrity of the licensing process. It fails to uphold the responsibility of the licensing authority to ensure that only qualified and genuinely needy individuals are granted the privilege of carrying a firearm. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant Mexican laws and regulations pertaining to firearm licensing. This framework should include a systematic process for evaluating all submitted documentation, verifying information where possible and legally permissible, and assessing the applicant's stated need against objective criteria. It also necessitates maintaining impartiality, avoiding personal biases, and documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them to ensure accountability and transparency. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates that a client in Mexico is seeking to obtain a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, with extreme urgency due to a perceived personal threat. The client suggests that their personal circumstances warrant bypassing some of the standard application procedures, implying that a more direct, albeit unofficial, approach might be possible. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the professional advising this client? Option A. Agree to explore unofficial channels or leverage personal contacts to expedite the licensing process, assuring the client that their urgency will be prioritized. Option B. Clearly explain to the client that the request to bypass standard procedures cannot be accommodated as it contravenes Mexican federal law and the established process for obtaining a licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, and then guide them on the correct legal application process. Option C. Inform the client that the request is too complex and that they should seek advice elsewhere, without providing any explanation or guidance on the legal requirements. Option D. Advise the client that while the official process is lengthy, they can proceed with possessing a firearm without the license, given their perceived immediate threat, and that enforcement is often lenient. The correct answer is B. Clearly explain to the client that the request to bypass standard procedures cannot be accommodated as it contravenes Mexican federal law and the established process for obtaining a licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, and then guide them on the correct legal application process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desire and the legal and ethical obligations of the professional. The client's request to circumvent established procedures for obtaining a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico, based on a perceived personal urgency, necessitates a careful balancing of client advocacy with strict adherence to Mexican law and ethical principles. Misjudging this situation could lead to severe legal repercussions for both the client and the professional, as well as damage to professional integrity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and unequivocally informing the client that the request cannot be fulfilled as stated because it violates Mexican federal law governing the acquisition and possession of firearms. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. The professional must explain that the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas is a formal authorization granted by the Secretariat of National Defense, Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional Sedena, only after a rigorous application process, including background checks, psychological evaluations, and proof of legitimate need. Attempting to bypass these legal requirements, even with the client's consent, is illegal and carries significant penalties. The professional's duty is to advise the client on the legal and proper channels, not to facilitate or condone illegal actions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to assist the client in obtaining the license through unofficial or expedited means, suggesting that personal connections or informal payments can accelerate the process. This is a direct violation of Mexican federal law, specifically the Federal Law of Firearms and Explosives, Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, which mandates strict adherence to established procedures. Such an action would constitute aiding and abetting illegal activity, exposing both the client and the professional to criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without providing any explanation or guidance on the legal process. While it avoids facilitating illegality, it fails to uphold the professional's duty to advise and guide the client within legal boundaries. This can lead to the client seeking illicit means to achieve their objective, potentially without any professional oversight. A further incorrect approach is to suggest that the client can simply possess a firearm without the required license, arguing that enforcement is lax or that the client's perceived urgency justifies the risk. This is a grave ethical and legal failing. The possession of a firearm without the proper licensure particular para la Portación de Armas is a criminal offense in Mexico, and advising or condoning such an action is a dereliction of professional duty and a violation of the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with sensitive matters like firearm licensing in Mexico must adopt a framework that begins with understanding the client's objective, followed by a thorough assessment of the legal and regulatory landscape. When a client's request conflicts with the law, the professional's primary responsibility is to uphold legal and ethical standards. This involves transparent communication about legal limitations, explaining the rationale behind these limitations, and offering guidance on lawful alternatives. The decision-making process should always prioritize integrity, legality, and the long-term well-being of both the client and the public, rather than succumbing to pressure or expediency. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates that an applicant for a particular license for the carrying of arms in Mexico has provided incomplete information regarding a past legal dispute and has been evasive when questioned about the details. Furthermore, a preliminary background check has flagged a potential discrepancy related to their stated employment history. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive investigation to verify all submitted information, gather additional documentation, and consult relevant authorities to fully assess the applicant's eligibility according to Mexican firearms licensing regulations before making a decision. Option B. Expedite the approval of the license, assuming the applicant's urgency and the minor nature of the discrepancies, to avoid unnecessary delays and potential complaints. Option C. Immediately deny the license application based on the initial suspicion and the applicant's evasiveness without further investigation, to err on the side of caution. Option D. Inform the applicant's employer about the flagged discrepancy and the ongoing investigation without their explicit consent, to seek their assistance in clarifying the employment history. The correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive investigation to verify all submitted information, gather additional documentation, and consult relevant authorities to fully assess the applicant's eligibility according to Mexican firearms licensing regulations before making a decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the strict legal requirements for obtaining a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico, with the ethical obligation to ensure public safety and prevent the misuse of firearms. The applicant's evasiveness and the discovery of potentially disqualifying information create a situation where a hasty approval could have severe consequences, while an outright denial without proper investigation could be unfair. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. The best approach involves a thorough and impartial investigation into the applicant's background and the circumstances surrounding the discovered information. This includes verifying the applicant's statements, gathering all relevant documentation, and consulting with appropriate authorities if necessary, all while adhering strictly to the procedures outlined in Mexican law for the issuance of firearms licenses. This approach is correct because it prioritizes due diligence and compliance with the legal framework, designed to ensure that only qualified individuals are granted the privilege of carrying a firearm. It upholds the principle that the licensing process is not merely administrative, but a critical safeguard for public security. An approach that involves overlooking the discrepancies due to the applicant's perceived urgency or social standing would be ethically and legally flawed. This would violate the principle of equal application of the law and could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who may pose a risk, thereby undermining public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the license based solely on the initial suspicion without conducting a comprehensive investigation. While caution is warranted, a denial without due process and a fair opportunity for the applicant to address the concerns or provide further information would be procedurally unfair and potentially unlawful. Finally, an approach that involves sharing the applicant's sensitive personal information with unauthorized third parties would be a severe breach of privacy and professional ethics, and would likely violate Mexican data protection laws. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal mandates, ethical responsibilities, and procedural fairness. This involves a systematic process of information gathering, verification, risk assessment, and transparent communication, ensuring that all decisions are well documented and justifiable under the relevant Mexican regulations governing firearms licensing. Question 5. System analysis indicates a firearms dealer in Mexico has received an application for a particular license for carrying arms. The applicant has submitted a package of documents, but the dealer has a strong suspicion that some critical supporting documents, as mandated by Mexican federal law, are either missing or appear to be altered. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the dealer to take? Option A. Accept the incomplete documentation and proceed with the licensing process, assuming the applicant will submit the missing items at a later stage. Option B. Meticulously review all submitted documents against the legal requirements for a particular license for carrying arms in Mexico, and if any discrepancies or omissions are found, formally inform the applicant of the specific deficiencies and provide guidance on how to rectify them. Option C. Reject the application outright and refuse to process it further due to the dealer's subjective suspicion of incomplete or altered documents, without attempting to clarify the situation with the applicant. Option D. Immediately approve the license application, trusting the applicant's assurance that all necessary documentation has been provided to avoid potential delays and maintain good customer relations. The correct answer is B. Meticulously review all submitted documents against the legal requirements for a particular license for carrying arms in Mexico, and if any discrepancies or omissions are found, formally inform the applicant of the specific deficiencies and provide guidance on how to rectify them. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms dealer in Mexico who has received a request for a particular license for carrying arms that appears to be incomplete or potentially fraudulent. The challenge lies in balancing the legal obligation to comply with the requirements for issuing such licenses with the ethical responsibility to prevent the misuse of firearms and uphold public safety. A hasty or negligent approval could have severe legal and ethical repercussions, while an overly cautious or accusatory approach could damage business relationships and lead to customer dissatisfaction if the documentation is indeed legitimate but poorly presented. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, systematic verification of all submitted documentation against the requirements stipulated by Mexican federal law for the particular license for carrying arms. This approach prioritizes adherence to legal mandates and safety protocols. Specifically, it requires the dealer to meticulously review each document, cross-referencing it with the official list of required permits, identification, and supporting evidence as outlined in the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and its corresponding regulations. If any discrepancies or omissions are identified, the dealer must formally communicate these deficiencies to the applicant, clearly stating the specific legal requirements that have not been met and providing guidance on how to rectify them. This ensures that the licensing process is conducted with integrity, minimizing the risk of issuing a license to an unqualified individual, and thereby upholding the dealer's legal and ethical obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately approving the license based on the applicant's assertion that the documentation is complete, without independent verification. This fails to meet the legal obligation to ensure all statutory requirements are satisfied, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to someone who does not meet the criteria, thereby violating public safety and the spirit of the law. Another incorrect approach is to outright reject the application and refuse to process it further solely based on a subjective feeling of suspicion or a minor, easily correctable omission, without first attempting to clarify the deficiencies with the applicant. This can be seen as unprofessional and potentially discriminatory if not grounded in specific legal noncompliance. It also fails to provide the applicant with an opportunity to correct errors, which is often a standard part of administrative processes. A third incorrect approach is to accept the incomplete documentation and proceed with the licensing process, assuming that the applicant will provide the missing items later. This is a direct contravention of the legal framework, as the license cannot be validly issued without all stipulated requirements being met at the time of application. This approach prioritizes expediency over legality and safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legal statutes and regulations governing firearms licensing in Mexico. This should be followed by a systematic process of document review, comparing submitted materials against these legal requirements. If deficiencies are found, the professional should communicate these clearly and constructively to the applicant, offering a defined path to resolution. This process ensures both legal compliance and ethical conduct, safeguarding public safety while maintaining professional integrity. Question 6. Implementation of the particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico requires officials to exercise sound judgment. An applicant, who is a distant acquaintance of the official, presents a seemingly complete application for a firearm license, citing self-defense as the primary reason. However, upon closer inspection, a minor administrative detail in one of the supporting documents appears to be inconsistently formatted, though the substance of the information is verifiable. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the official? Option A. Proceed with a thorough verification of all documentation, including the inconsistently formatted item, ensuring all legal requirements are met before making a decision, and documenting the verification process meticulously. Option B. Forward the application to a superior with a recommendation for approval, mentioning the acquaintance, and allowing the superior to handle the final decision. Option C. Deny the license immediately based on the formatting inconsistency, citing it as a failure to meet application standards without further investigation. Option D. Approve the license promptly due to the acquaintance and the apparent completeness of the rest of the application, assuming the minor formatting issue is inconsequential. The correct answer is A. Proceed with a thorough verification of all documentation, including the inconsistently formatted item, ensuring all legal requirements are met before making a decision, and documenting the verification process meticulously. Explanation. The implementation of the particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico presents a significant ethical challenge for officials responsible for its issuance. The core of this challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to self-defense, as potentially recognized by law, with the paramount public safety interest and the strict requirements of the regulatory framework. Officials must navigate potential pressures, personal biases, and the risk of corruption while adhering rigorously to established legal procedures and ethical standards. The integrity of the licensing process is crucial to preventing firearms from falling into the wrong hands, thereby safeguarding the community. The correct approach involves a meticulous and impartial review of all submitted documentation against the explicit criteria established by Mexican federal law and regulations governing firearms. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, criminal record, psychological and physical fitness, and the legitimate reason for requiring a firearm, as defined by law. The official must ensure that all legal prerequisites are met without exception, and without succumbing to any form of undue influence or personal discretion beyond what the law permits. This adherence to established legal parameters is the bedrock of ethical conduct in this sensitive area, directly upholding the public trust and the rule of law. An incorrect approach would be to expedite the process or overlook minor discrepancies in documentation based on a personal acquaintance or a perceived urgency of the applicant's situation. This bypasses the legally mandated due diligence, creating a loophole that could compromise public safety and violates the principle of equal application of the law. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license based on subjective interpretations of the applicant's character or perceived threat level, without concrete evidence or legal grounds for such a decision. This constitutes an abuse of discretionary power and infringes upon the applicant's rights if they otherwise meet all legal requirements. Furthermore, accepting any form of gratuity or favor in exchange for a favorable decision is a direct violation of anti-corruption laws and ethical codes, undermining the entire integrity of the licensing system. Professionals in this role must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical integrity above all else. This involves a commitment to understanding the full scope of the relevant Mexican federal laws and regulations, maintaining strict impartiality, and documenting every step of the decision-making process. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification from legal counsel or higher authorities within the established chain of command is essential. The ultimate goal is to ensure that every license issued is fully compliant with the law and contributes to, rather than detracts from, public safety. Question 7. To address the challenge of ensuring compliance with Mexico's stringent firearms regulations, a licensed dealer receives a request to purchase a handgun from a long-standing customer who presents a physical copy of their Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas. The dealer recalls this customer has purchased firearms previously and has always seemed reputable. What is the most responsible and legally sound course of action for the dealer to take in this situation? Option A. Inform the customer that while their current license may be valid, it would be prudent for them to obtain a new, updated permit or a temporary authorization from SEDENA to ensure a smooth transaction. Option B. Immediately contact the Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional, SEDENA, to confirm the authenticity and current validity of the presented Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas before proceeding with the sale. Option C. Proceed with the sale, as the customer is a repeat buyer and has provided a physical copy of their permit, which appears to be in order. Option D. Accept the customer's verbal assurance that their license is still valid and that they have no outstanding issues with SEDENA, given their history of reliable transactions. The correct answer is B. Immediately contact the Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional, SEDENA, to confirm the authenticity and current validity of the presented Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas before proceeding with the sale. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms dealer in Mexico due to the strict regulations surrounding the Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas. The core difficulty lies in balancing business operations with the absolute requirement of verifying the validity and legitimacy of a customer's permit. Failure to do so can lead to severe legal repercussions, including fines, license revocation, and criminal charges, as well as damage to the business's reputation and trust. The ethical dimension is paramount, as the dealer has a responsibility to uphold public safety by ensuring firearms are only sold to individuals legally authorized to possess them. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying the authenticity and current validity of the customer's Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas directly with the issuing authority, the Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional, SEDENA, before completing any sale. This approach ensures strict compliance with Mexican federal law, specifically the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, which mandates that all sales of firearms must be accompanied by a valid permit. By proactively confirming the permit's status, the dealer demonstrates due diligence, upholds legal obligations, and contributes to public safety by preventing unauthorized firearm acquisition. This direct verification is the most robust method to mitigate risk and ensure the transaction is lawful. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the sale based solely on the customer presenting a physical copy of the license without independent verification is a significant regulatory failure. While the customer has provided documentation, the law requires the dealer to ensure its legitimacy, not merely accept it at face value. This approach risks accepting a fraudulent or expired permit, violating the spirit and letter of the law. Accepting a verbal confirmation from the customer that their license is valid, or relying on a previous transaction history with the same customer, constitutes a severe ethical and regulatory lapse. The law requires documented, verifiable proof of authorization for each transaction. Past compliance does not guarantee current authorization, and verbal assurances are insufficient to meet the legal standard of due diligence. This approach bypasses essential verification steps and exposes the dealer to substantial legal risk. Suggesting the customer obtain a new license or a temporary permit from a less stringent source, or implying that the sale can proceed without a fully compliant license if the customer is known to be trustworthy, represents a profound disregard for Mexican firearms regulation. This approach actively undermines the legal framework designed to control firearm distribution and poses a direct threat to public safety. It is ethically reprehensible and legally indefensible. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to regulatory compliance. The decision-making process should prioritize legal obligations and public safety above immediate sales or customer convenience. When faced with any doubt regarding the validity of a required permit, the professional standard dictates seeking direct, independent verification from the official issuing authority. This systematic approach, involving thorough documentation and verification, is crucial for maintaining legal standing, ethical integrity, and contributing to a secure environment. Question 8. The review process indicates that an applicant for a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico has a documented history of several minor infractions, none of which involved violent offenses or direct threats to public safety. Considering the requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, which of the following approaches best reflects the appropriate decision-making framework for this situation? Option A. Automatically deny the license application due to the presence of any infractions, irrespective of their severity or nature, as a precautionary measure to uphold public safety. Option B. Base the decision solely on the applicant's personal assurances that they are of good character, disregarding the documented history of infractions as a minor detail. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the nature, recency, and context of each infraction, assessing their potential impact on the applicant's demonstrated good conduct and suitability for firearm possession under Mexican law, and make a decision based on this comprehensive evaluation. Option D. Approve the license application without further scrutiny, assuming that minor infractions are irrelevant to the applicant's eligibility for firearm possession under Mexican law. Correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of the nature, recency, and context of each infraction, assessing their potential impact on the applicant's demonstrated good conduct and suitability for firearm possession under Mexican law, and make a decision based on this comprehensive evaluation. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential applicant for a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico has a history of minor infractions. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to seek a license with the paramount public safety concerns mandated by Mexican firearms regulations. The decision-maker must meticulously assess whether past minor infractions, even if not directly related to violent crime, pose an unacceptable risk under the established legal framework. Careful judgment is required to avoid both undue leniency and unwarranted denial, adhering strictly to the provisions of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. The correct approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's entire record, focusing on the nature and recency of any infractions, and their potential relevance to responsible firearm ownership as defined by Mexican law. This approach is correct because Article 10 of the Mexican Constitution and the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos require applicants to demonstrate good conduct and a lack of impediments to possessing firearms. A comprehensive review, considering the specific details of past infractions and their potential impact on public safety, aligns with the spirit and letter of these laws. It allows for a nuanced decision based on evidence rather than blanket assumptions. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the license based solely on the existence of any infraction, regardless of its severity or nature. This fails to acknowledge that Mexican law may permit individuals with certain minor infractions to still qualify, provided they meet other criteria and demonstrate rehabilitation, or that the infraction does not constitute a disqualifying factor. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook or downplay the significance of any infractions, assuming they are too minor to matter. This disregards the regulatory requirement to assess good conduct and could potentially compromise public safety by licensing an individual who may not be a responsible firearm owner. Finally, an approach that relies on personal bias or arbitrary criteria, rather than the specific legal requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, is fundamentally flawed and unethical. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. This involves 1. Verifying all applicant information and conducting thorough background checks. 2. Analyzing the nature, severity, and recency of any disclosed infractions. 3. Consulting relevant legal precedents and interpretations of the law regarding disqualifying offenses. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for approval or denial, with clear reference to the specific legal provisions applied. 5. Seeking guidance from legal counsel or supervisory authorities when faced with ambiguous cases. Question 9. Examination of the data shows that an individual in Mexico wishes to obtain a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. They have heard from a friend that the process is straightforward and involves simply submitting a form and a photograph, and that carrying a firearm for personal protection is generally permitted without further authorization as long as it is not used offensively. What is the most appropriate course of action for this individual to ensure compliance with Mexican federal law regarding firearms? Option A. Assume that possessing a firearm for self-defense is sufficient grounds for carrying it, and that the friend's information about the process is generally accurate, requiring only minimal documentation. Option B. Seek out individuals who have recently obtained similar licenses through informal channels, believing they can provide practical advice on navigating the process more efficiently than official channels. Option C. Proceed with submitting a form and photograph to the local authorities, assuming that the friend's advice reflects the current and complete legal requirements for carrying a firearm for personal protection. Option D. Directly consult the official website of the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, or visit a SEDENA office to obtain the precise list of requirements, application forms, and procedural guidelines for the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, and meticulously follow these official instructions. The correct answer is D. Directly consult the official website of the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, or visit a SEDENA office to obtain the precise list of requirements, application forms, and procedural guidelines for the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, and meticulously follow these official instructions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the specific legal requirements for obtaining a particular license for carrying arms in Mexico, a process governed by strict federal regulations. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these regulations can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the confiscation of firearms. The applicant's reliance on informal advice highlights a common pitfall where individuals bypass official channels, potentially leading to non-compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously following the official procedures and requirements as outlined by the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, for obtaining a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. This includes ensuring all documentation is accurate, complete, and submitted through the designated channels. The applicant must demonstrate they meet all legal prerequisites, such as being of legal age, having a clean criminal record, and proving a legitimate need for self-defense or sport shooting, as defined by Mexican law. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal framework established by the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and its associated regulations, ensuring lawful possession and carrying of firearms. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or acquaintances regarding the licensing process. This is professionally unacceptable because such advice may be outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete, failing to account for the specific legal nuances and evolving regulations set forth by SEDENA. This can lead to the submission of incorrect documentation or the omission of critical steps, resulting in the denial of the license or legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to assume that possessing a firearm for personal protection automatically grants the right to carry it without a specific license. Mexican law is explicit that carrying a firearm outside one's domicile requires a valid Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas issued by SEDENA. This approach fails to recognize the distinction between ownership and the legal right to carry, which is a fundamental regulatory requirement. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to expedite the process by offering unofficial incentives or seeking shortcuts outside of the established administrative procedures. This is not only illegal and unethical, but also undermines the integrity of the licensing system. Such actions could lead to severe criminal penalties for both the applicant and any official involved, and would certainly result in the denial of the license. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with licensing requirements, especially in sensitive areas like firearms, must adopt a principle of strict adherence to official regulations. The decision-making framework should prioritize seeking information directly from the governing authority, SEDENA in this case, ensuring all submitted materials are verified for accuracy and completeness, and understanding that legal compliance is paramount. When in doubt, Consulting with legal counsel specializing in Mexican firearms law is advisable before taking any action. The focus should always be on lawful process and verifiable documentation. Question 10. Upon reviewing the requirements for a licensure particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico, an applicant provides you with a document stating the base application fee is $150 USD and the federal tax is 500 MXN. The applicant also mentions they are on a tight budget and would prefer to pay the lowest possible amount that is legally compliant. If the current official exchange rate published by Banco de Mexico is 1 USD equals 17.50 MXN, what is the precise total amount the applicant must pay in Mexican pesos to fulfill the fee requirements? Option A, 100 MXN. Option B, 150 MXN. Option C, 3000 MXN. Option D, 125 MXN. The correct answer is D, 125 MXN. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise calculation of fees based on specific legal provisions, where any miscalculation could lead to an incomplete application, delays, or even rejection, impacting the applicant's ability to legally carry a firearm. The applicant's financial situation adds a layer of complexity, necessitating a clear understanding of the fee structure and any potential waivers or installment options, if applicable under Mexican law. The correct approach involves accurately calculating the total fee for the licensure particular para la Portación de Armas by summing the base application fee and the applicable federal tax, then determining the exact amount payable in Mexican pesos, MXN, based on the current exchange rate for the US dollar portion. This is correct because Mexican law, specifically the Ley Federal de Derechos, dictates the specific fees and taxes associated with firearm permits. Article 19 of this law, for instance, outlines the federal rights payable for various permits, including those for carrying arms. The calculation must adhere strictly to these established rates and the official exchange rate published by the Banco de Mexico on the date of payment to ensure compliance with the regulatory framework. An incorrect approach would be to round the total fee to the nearest whole dollar or peso, or to use an arbitrary exchange rate. This is incorrect because it deviates from the precise amount stipulated by law and the official exchange rate, potentially resulting in an underpayment or overpayment, both of which can lead to application rejection or administrative complications. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the fee is a flat rate without accounting for the separate federal tax. This is incorrect as it fails to recognize the distinct components of the total cost as defined by the Ley Federal de Derechos, leading to an incomplete payment and noncompliance. Lastly, attempting to pay a significantly lower amount based on a personal interpretation of affordability or a past fee structure would be incorrect, as it disregards the current legal requirements and fee schedule entirely. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to legal mandates. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable fees and taxes as per the relevant Mexican legislation, e.g., Ley Federal de Derechos. 2. Obtaining the most current official exchange rate from a recognized source like the Banco de Mexico. 3. Performing precise calculations, ensuring all components are accounted for and converted accurately. 4. Verifying the final amount against the legal requirements before advising the applicant or submitting payment. Question 11. When evaluating an application for a licensure particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico, what is the most appropriate approach for an applicant to demonstrate a legitimate need for carrying a firearm? Option A. Clearly articulate a specific, demonstrable reason for personal defense that aligns with the heightened risk factors recognized by Mexican federal law, supported by relevant documentation. Option B. Submit an application asserting the right to self-defense without providing specific justifications beyond a general sense of unease. Option C. Claim the need to carry a firearm for occasional participation in shooting sports. Option D. State a general desire for enhanced personal security due to living in a metropolitan area. The correct answer is A. Clearly articulate a specific, demonstrable reason for personal defense that aligns with the heightened risk factors recognized by Mexican federal law, supported by relevant documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the specific requirements of Mexican federal law concerning the private license for carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, while also considering the nuances of their personal circumstances. The challenge lies in accurately assessing whether their stated purpose for seeking the license aligns with the legal definitions and limitations, and in presenting a case that is both truthful and compliant. Misinterpreting the scope of permissible reasons or failing to provide adequate documentation can lead to denial, and in some cases, potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure all information provided is accurate and directly addresses the legal criteria. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the Mexican federal law of firearms and explosives, Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, and its associated regulations. This approach requires the applicant to clearly articulate a legitimate reason for carrying a firearm that falls within the scope permitted by the law, such as personal defense in a high-risk area, and to provide supporting documentation that substantiates this claim. This includes demonstrating a genuine need that goes beyond general convenience or a desire for self-protection without specific, demonstrable threats. The law is restrictive, and adherence to its specific stipulations regarding the types of firearms, the caliber, and the justification for their possession is paramount. This approach ensures the application is grounded in legal compliance and factual evidence, maximizing the chances of approval. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves broadly stating a need for personal protection without providing specific details or evidence of elevated risk. Mexican law does not grant licenses based on generalized fears. It requires a demonstrable, specific threat or a situation that warrants such a measure beyond ordinary circumstances. This approach fails to meet the legal threshold for justification. Another incorrect approach is to claim a need for carrying a firearm for professional reasons that are not explicitly recognized or permitted by the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. This license is distinct from those issued for specific professional duties, e.g., security personnel, and attempting to fit a professional need into the personal license framework without meeting the specific criteria for personal defense is a misapplication of the law. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application with incomplete or misleading information regarding the applicant's background or the intended use of the firearm. The authorities conduct thorough background checks, and any omission or misrepresentation can lead to immediate denial and potential legal consequences, as it violates the principle of truthfulness required in all legal applications. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a deep understanding of the specific legal requirements of the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico. This involves 1. Researching and understanding the exact definitions and limitations of permissible reasons for carrying a firearm as outlined in the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. 2. Honestly assessing personal circumstances against these legal criteria to determine if a genuine, legally recognized need exists. 3. Gathering and meticulously preparing all required documentation that directly supports the stated reason, ensuring accuracy and completeness. 4. Consulting with legal counsel specializing in firearms law in Mexico if there is any ambiguity regarding eligibility or application procedures. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are based on legal compliance and factual evidence, rather than assumptions or generalized desires. Question 12. The analysis reveals that a resident of Mexico City is applying for a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, and has disclosed a conviction for public intoxication from 2 years ago. Considering the provisions of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record, specifically assessing whether the public intoxication conviction, under Mexican law, disqualifies them from obtaining the license, and consider any mitigating factors or the nature of the offense in relation to the law's intent. Option B. Request additional documentation from the applicant to prove they are not a threat, without a specific legal basis for such a request beyond the existence of the conviction. Option C. Automatically deny the license application because any criminal conviction, regardless of its nature, renders an individual ineligible for a firearm license in Mexico. Option D. Grant the license immediately upon confirmation of the applicant's residency in Mexico City, assuming that a minor infraction like public intoxication does not impact their right to carry a firearm. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record, specifically assessing whether the public intoxication conviction under Mexican law disqualifies them from obtaining the license, and consider any mitigating factors or the nature of the offense in relation to the law's intent. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where an individual is seeking to obtain a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico, but their application is complicated by a recent, albeit minor, conviction for public intoxication. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Mexican firearms legislation, specifically the criteria for eligibility and the impact of criminal records, even those that are not directly related to violence or the misuse of weapons. The licensing authority must balance the public safety mandate with the individual's right to self-defense, as recognized by Mexican law, while strictly adhering to the legal requirements for obtaining such a license. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's entire criminal record and a careful assessment of whether the public intoxication conviction, under Mexican law, disqualifies them from obtaining the license. This requires consulting the relevant articles of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and its associated regulations. The law outlines specific prohibitions, and the interpretation of whether a conviction for public intoxication falls under these prohibitions, or if it can be overcome by demonstrating rehabilitation or the minor nature of the offense, is crucial. The licensing authority must act with due diligence, ensuring that all legal prerequisites are met, and that the decision is based on a comprehensive understanding of the applicant's history in relation to the law's intent. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by rigorously applying the established criteria for firearm possession. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the license solely based on the existence of any criminal conviction, without a detailed examination of the nature of the offense and its relevance to firearm possession under Mexican law. Public intoxication, while a legal infraction, may not inherently signify a propensity for violence or a disregard for public safety in a manner that would disqualify an applicant under the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license without a proper background check or by making an arbitrary decision based on personal discretion rather than established legal frameworks. This would undermine the integrity of the licensing process and potentially compromise public safety. Furthermore, relying on outdated or incomplete information regarding the applicant's record would also constitute a failure to adhere to the law. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the applicable laws and regulations. This involves identifying the specific legal provisions governing the issuance of firearm licenses, including disqualifying factors. The next step is to gather all relevant information about the applicant, including their criminal history, and to meticulously analyze this information against the legal criteria. If there is ambiguity, seeking clarification from legal counsel or the relevant governing body is advisable. The decision should then be made based on a reasoned application of the law to the facts, ensuring transparency and fairness throughout the process. Question 13. Comparative studies suggest that the evaluation process for a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico requires careful consideration of various factors. If an applicant for a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico submits a complete application demonstrating a history of threats and a well-documented fear for their personal safety, but the evaluating official has a general concern about the proliferation of firearms in the region, which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework for issuing such licenses. Option A. Request additional documentation that is not explicitly required by the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos to further investigate the applicant's background. Option B. Grant the license immediately without further scrutiny, assuming the applicant's stated fear is sufficient justification. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's documentation, verifying their stated need for self-defense against specific threats, and assessing their overall suitability according to the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and its regulations. Option D. Deny the license based on the official's general concern about firearm proliferation in the region, irrespective of the applicant's specific circumstances. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's documentation, verifying their stated need for self-defense against specific threats, and assessing their overall suitability according to the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and its regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Mexican federal firearms regulation, specifically concerning the Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas. The core difficulty lies in balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the stringent requirements and discretionary powers vested in the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, to grant or deny such licenses. Professionals must navigate the legal framework while exercising sound judgment, ensuring compliance and upholding public safety without arbitrary denial. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough and objective review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the explicit criteria outlined in the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, Federal Law on Firearms and Explosives, and its corresponding regulations. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, criminal record, psychological and physical fitness, and demonstrating a legitimate and demonstrable need for carrying a firearm that cannot be adequately met through other means. The decision must be based on the merits of the application as presented and substantiated, adhering strictly to the legal requirements for issuance. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the legal mandate of SEDENA to regulate firearms possession and ensures that decisions are made based on established legal standards, promoting fairness and preventing arbitrary denials. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to deny the license solely based on a generalized concern about increased crime rates in the applicant's neighborhood, without specific evidence linking the applicant to immediate personal danger that cannot be mitigated by other means. This fails to meet the requirement of demonstrating a specific, demonstrable need for the applicant. Another incorrect approach is to grant the license without a comprehensive review of all required documentation, such as neglecting to verify the applicant's psychological fitness or criminal record. This bypasses critical safety checks mandated by law and poses a significant risk to public safety. A further incorrect approach is to deny the license based on personal bias or assumptions about the applicant's character or perceived trustworthiness, rather than on objective criteria and evidence presented in the application. This constitutes an arbitrary and unethical decision-making process, violating the principles of due process and administrative fairness. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with evaluating applications for a Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico should employ a structured decision-making framework. This framework begins with a meticulous understanding of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and its regulations. It requires an objective assessment of each application, verifying all submitted documentation against established legal criteria. The process should involve a systematic evaluation of the applicant's demonstrated need, ensuring it is specific, demonstrable, and cannot be reasonably addressed through alternative security measures. Any denial must be supported by clear, legally sound reasoning, based on the failure to meet specific statutory requirements, and applicants should be informed of their right to appeal. Question 14. The investigation demonstrates that Mr. Javier Rodriguez has submitted an application for a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia Particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico City. His application appears to be complete on its face, with all standard forms filled out. However, a junior officer reviewing the application has heard a rumor that Mr. Rodriguez may have a history of aggressive behavior. Though no formal complaints or convictions are immediately apparent, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Inform Mr. Rodriguez that his application is being put on hold indefinitely due to an unconfirmed report of aggressive behavior and request he provide evidence to disprove it. Option B. Deny the license application based on the unsubstantiated rumor of aggressive behavior as a precautionary measure for public safety. Option C. Proceed with a comprehensive background investigation, including checks for any formal complaints, restraining orders, or documented incidents of aggressive behavior, while also verifying all submitted documentation against official records before making a decision on the license application. Option D. Approve the license application immediately, as all submitted paperwork is complete and the rumor is unsubstantiated. The correct answer is C. Proceed with a comprehensive background investigation, including checks for any formal complaints, restraining orders, or documented incidents of aggressive behavior, while also verifying all submitted documentation against official records before making a decision on the license application. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where an individual, Mr. Javier Rodriguez, has applied for a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, in Mexico City. The challenge lies in ensuring that the application process strictly adheres to the legal requirements, and that any potential disqualifying factors are thoroughly investigated without infringing upon the applicant's rights. The complexity arises from balancing the state's mandate to regulate firearm possession for public safety with the individual's right to apply for such a license, provided they meet the stringent criteria. Hasty or incomplete review could lead to either the issuance of a license to an unsuitable individual, posing a public risk, or the wrongful denial of a license to a qualified applicant, leading to legal challenges. The correct approach involves a meticulous and impartial review of all submitted documentation and a thorough background check, as mandated by Mexican federal and local firearms regulations. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, confirming they meet the age and residency requirements, assessing their mental and physical fitness, and ensuring they have no criminal record or history of domestic violence, all of which are explicit disqualifiers under Mexican law. The process must be conducted with due diligence, adhering to the established procedures for license issuance, which are designed to safeguard public order and security. This systematic verification ensures that only those who demonstrably meet all legal prerequisites are granted a license, upholding the integrity of the firearms licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to approve the license based solely on the completeness of the initial paperwork, without conducting the mandatory background checks. This bypasses critical legal requirements designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands, and directly violates the spirit and letter of Mexican firearms legislation, which prioritizes public safety. Another flawed approach would be to deny the license based on unsubstantiated rumors or personal biases, rather than on concrete evidence of disqualification as defined by law. This constitutes an arbitrary decision, violating the applicant's right to a fair process and potentially leading to legal recourse against the issuing authority. Furthermore, delaying the process indefinitely without valid justification or failing to inform the applicant of the reasons for any potential denial would also be a violation of procedural fairness and established administrative protocols. Professionals tasked with reviewing these applications must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes, procedural fairness, and objective evidence. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and any relevant local ordinances in Mexico City. The framework should include a checklist of all necessary documents and background checks, a clear protocol for handling discrepancies or red flags, and a defined timeline for processing applications. Transparency and impartiality are paramount, ensuring that decisions are based on facts and legal criteria, not on assumptions or external pressures. Question 15. Analysis of a scenario in Mexico where an individual is seeking a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. The applicant has gathered their official identification and a general statement asserting a need for personal protection. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework for obtaining this license? Option A. Meticulously compile all required documentation as stipulated by the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, including proof of lawful occupation, proof of domicile, certificates of good conduct and no criminal record, and successfully pass the mandatory psychological and technical evaluations, while clearly demonstrating a legally recognized need for carrying a firearm. Option B. Submit an incomplete application consisting only of official identification and a general statement of need for personal protection, assuming these are sufficient to initiate the process. Option C. Expedite the process by submitting falsified or incomplete supporting documents, such as fabricated proof of domicile or a misrepresented occupation, to accelerate the application review. Option D. Provide a sworn statement of self-defense as the sole justification for carrying a firearm, without any further supporting documentation or evaluations. Correct answer is A. Meticulously compile all required documentation as stipulated by the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, including proof of lawful occupation, proof of domicile, certificates of good conduct and no criminal record, and successfully pass the mandatory psychological and technical evaluations, while clearly demonstrating a legally recognized need for carrying a firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the specific legal requirements for obtaining a particular license for carrying arms in Mexico, a process governed by strict federal regulations. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these regulations can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the denial of the license. The professional's responsibility is to ensure all documentation and procedures are meticulously followed, according to the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and accurate compilation of all required documentation as stipulated by the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. This includes ensuring that the application form is correctly filled out, accompanied by the necessary identification, proof of lawful occupation, proof of domicile, and the required certificates of good conduct and no criminal record. Furthermore, it necessitates demonstrating the legitimate need for carrying a firearm, as defined by Mexican law, and passing the relevant psychological and technical evaluations. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the explicit requirements of the federal law, minimizing the risk of application rejection or legal repercussions. Incorrect approach is analysis. Submitting an incomplete application with only basic identification and a general statement of need fails to meet the detailed documentation requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. This approach is incorrect because it overlooks critical elements such as proof of lawful occupation, domicile verification, and the mandatory psychological and technical evaluations, all of which are essential for a valid application. Providing a sworn statement of self-defense as the sole justification for carrying a firearm, without the supporting documentation and evaluations mandated by law, is also an insufficient approach. Mexican law requires a more rigorous demonstration of need and suitability, which includes objective evidence and professional assessments, not just a personal declaration. This approach is incorrect as it bypasses the legally prescribed verification processes. Attempting to expedite the process by submitting falsified or incomplete supporting documents, such as fabricated proof of domicile or a misrepresented occupation, constitutes a serious violation of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. This approach is fundamentally flawed and illegal, as it involves deception and fraud, leading to immediate application denial and potential criminal prosecution. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with license applications in Mexico must adopt a systematic and compliant approach. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal framework governing the license, in this case, the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. 2. Carefully reviewing the official requirements for documentation and eligibility. 3. Gathering all necessary original documents and certifications. 4. Completing the application form accurately and truthfully. 5. Undergoing all mandated evaluations and assessments. 6. Submitting the complete application package within the stipulated time frame. This structured decision-making process ensures adherence to legal mandates and promotes ethical conduct. Question 16. Consider a scenario where a resident of Mexico City wishes to legally carry a firearm for personal protection and has heard from a friend that the process is straightforward and involves minimal paperwork. The friend mentioned that a previous acquaintance obtained a license quickly by simply submitting a letter of intent and a copy of their identification. What is the most appropriate course of action for the individual to ensure they are compliant with Mexican federal law regarding the licensure particular para la Portación de Armas? Option A. Seek out an individual who claims to be able to expedite the licensing process through unofficial means, as this is often faster and more efficient. Option B. Assume that the requirements are minimal and that a previous license, if ever held, would automatically be considered valid for renewal without needing to verify current regulations. Option C. Diligently follow the official application process for a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas by gathering all required documentation, submitting a formal application to the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, and undergoing all mandated evaluations. Option D. Rely on the informal advice from the friend, submit a letter of intent and a copy of identification to SEDENA, and hope for a quick approval based on the acquaintance's experience. Correct answer is C. Diligently follow the official application process for a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas by gathering all required documentation, submitting a formal application to the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, and undergoing all mandated evaluations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the complex legal requirements for firearm ownership in Mexico, specifically concerning the Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. Misunderstanding or misapplying these regulations can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the confiscation of the firearm. The applicant's reliance on informal advice and the urgency of their situation create a high-pressure environment where accurate adherence to the law is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves diligently following the established legal procedures for obtaining a Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas, as outlined by Mexican federal law. This includes gathering all required documentation, such as proof of identity, proof of legal residence, a certificate of no criminal record, proof of lawful employment or means of subsistence, and a certificate of psychological and toxicological fitness. The applicant must then submit a formal application to the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, and undergo the necessary background checks and evaluations. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal framework governing firearm possession in Mexico, ensuring compliance and minimizing legal risk. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible gun ownership by adhering to the prescribed governmental process. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that relies solely on informal advice from a friend or acquaintance, even if they have prior experience, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge that legal requirements can change and that informal advice may be incomplete, outdated, or inaccurate. It bypasses the official channels and regulatory scrutiny designed to ensure public safety and responsible firearm ownership, thereby violating the spirit and letter of Mexican firearm laws. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to attempt to obtain the license through unofficial or expedited channels, such as paying a facilitator or attempting to bypass standard procedures. This not only carries a high risk of fraud and corruption, but also directly contravenes the legal framework established by SEDENA. Such actions undermine the integrity of the licensing system and expose the individual to severe legal penalties. Finally, assuming that a previous license automatically renews or that the requirements are minimal without verifying the current regulations is a critical error. Mexican law mandates specific renewal procedures and updated documentation. Failing to follow these procedures can result in the expiration of the license and the illegal possession of a firearm, leading to legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a systematic decision-making framework. First, identify the specific legal and regulatory requirements applicable to the situation. In this case, it means consulting official Mexican federal laws and SEDENA guidelines regarding firearm licenses. Second, gather all necessary documentation and information directly from authoritative sources. Third, follow the prescribed application and approval processes meticulously, without deviation. Fourth, seek professional legal counsel if there is any ambiguity or complexity in the requirements. This structured approach ensures compliance, mitigates risk, and upholds ethical standards. Question 17. During the evaluation of an application for a particular license for the carrying of arms in Mexico, an applicant presents a compelling narrative of perceived threats to their personal safety due to their business dealings in a high-crime area. They express significant fear for their life and the lives of their family members, stating that they believe carrying a firearm is the only effective deterrent. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough investigation to verify the applicant's claims of threat, assess their eligibility based on all legal requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, and determine if the specific circumstances justify the issuance of a license according to established legal criteria. Option B. Advise the applicant to seek alternative security measures, such as private security personnel, and deny the license without further investigation into the specific threat. Option C. Issue the license immediately based on the applicant's expressed fear and the perceived urgency of their situation, as personal safety is a paramount concern. Option D. Deny the license outright due to the inherent risks associated with carrying firearms in high-crime areas, regardless of the applicant's specific circumstances. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough investigation to verify the applicant's claims of threat, assess their eligibility based on all legal requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, and determine if the specific circumstances justify the issuance of a license according to established legal criteria. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing an individual's right to self-defense with the state's paramount interest in public safety and the strict regulation of firearms. The applicant's personal circumstances, while emotionally compelling, must be evaluated against the objective criteria established by Mexican law for the issuance of a particular license for the carrying of arms. Misinterpreting or misapplying these criteria can lead to either an unwarranted grant of a license, jeopardizing public safety, or an unjustified denial, infringing upon an individual's legal rights. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's situation against the specific requirements outlined in the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, federal law on firearms and explosives, and its corresponding regulations. This includes verifying the applicant's stated need for carrying a firearm, ensuring they meet all eligibility criteria such as age, mental and physical fitness, and a clean criminal record, and confirming that the intended firearm is permissible. The justification for carrying a firearm must be demonstrably linked to a genuine and verifiable threat to personal safety that cannot be adequately mitigated by other means, as stipulated by Mexican law. This rigorous, evidence-based evaluation is the cornerstone of responsible firearm licensing. An incorrect approach would be to grant the license based solely on the applicant's expressed fear and the perceived urgency of their situation, without independent verification or adherence to the legal framework. This bypasses the mandated due diligence and could lead to a firearm being issued to someone who does not meet the legal requirements, thereby undermining public safety and violating the spirit and letter of the law. Another incorrect approach would be to summarily deny the license based on a generalized concern about firearm proliferation, without a specific, legally justifiable reason derived from the applicant's circumstances or failure to meet explicit legal criteria. This would be an arbitrary decision, failing to uphold the law's provisions for legitimate self-defense under specific, regulated conditions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to focus on the applicant's emotional state or personal narrative without grounding the decision in the objective legal requirements for the license. While empathy is important, the decision must be guided by established legal standards and evidence, not subjective feelings or anecdotal justifications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, objective evidence, and a thorough risk assessment. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. 2. Gathering and verifying all necessary documentation and evidence from the applicant. 3. Conducting an objective assessment of the applicant's stated need against legal thresholds. 4. Consulting relevant legal precedents and guidelines. 5. Documenting the entire decision-making process meticulously. Question 18. Research into the requirements for obtaining a particular license for the carrying of arms in Mexico reveals a complex application process. Considering the Mexican federal law of firearms and explosives, which of the following approaches best ensures a successful and legally compliant application for an individual seeking such a license? Option A. Diligently gather all required documentation, truthfully declare all personal and occupational information, and ensure all statutory prerequisites, including necessary evaluations, are met as per the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. Option B. Submit an application with a general statement of personal protection as the sole justification, assuming this is sufficient grounds for carrying a firearm under Mexican law. Option C. Rely on informal advice from acquaintances who have previously obtained firearm licenses to understand the necessary steps and documentation. Option D. Provide only the most essential documents, omitting any personal history details that might be perceived as potentially negative, to expedite the process. The correct answer is A. Diligently gather all required documentation, truthfully declare all personal and occupational information, and ensure all statutory prerequisites, including necessary evaluations, are met as per the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the specific legal requirements for obtaining a particular license for carrying arms in Mexico, balancing personal circumstances with strict regulatory compliance. Misinterpreting or disregarding these requirements can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the denial of the license. The professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure all conditions are met accurately and truthfully. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and accurate understanding of the requirements outlined in the Mexican Federal Law of Firearms and Explosives, Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, and its associated regulations. This includes meticulously gathering all necessary documentation, such as proof of legal residency, a clean criminal record, proof of employment or lawful occupation, demonstrating a legitimate reason for carrying a firearm, as stipulated by Article 10 of the Constitution and further detailed in the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. The applicant must also undergo the required psychological and physical evaluations. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework established by Mexico for the issuance of such licenses, ensuring that the application is complete, truthful, and meets all statutory prerequisites. It prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to submit an application with incomplete or falsified documentation, such as misrepresenting one's occupation or failing to disclose relevant personal history. This is a direct violation of the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, which mandates truthful and complete disclosure. Such actions constitute fraud and can lead to immediate denial of the license, as well as potential criminal prosecution. Another incorrect approach is to assume that possessing a firearm for personal protection is automatically sufficient grounds for a license, without meeting the specific criteria and demonstrating a demonstrable need as defined by Mexican law. The Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos outlines specific justifications and requires a formal process, not merely a personal belief. Failing to follow this process and provide the legally required evidence is a regulatory failure. A further incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or hearsay regarding the licensing process rather than consulting the official legal statutes and regulations. This can lead to significant errors in documentation or understanding of requirements, resulting in an incomplete or invalid application. It bypasses the established legal channels for obtaining information and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should employ a structured decision-making framework. First, they must identify the specific legal and regulatory framework governing the particular license in Mexico, which is primarily the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos. Second, they should meticulously research and understand each requirement outlined in the law, paying close attention to documentation, eligibility criteria, and the application process. Third, they must gather all necessary evidence and information accurately and truthfully. Fourth, they should seek official guidance from relevant Mexican authorities if any aspect of the requirements is unclear. Finally, they must submit a complete and accurate application, ensuring all legal obligations are met. Question 19. System analysis indicates that an applicant in Mexico is seeking a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. The applicant believes that general concerns about crime in their area constitute a sufficient, justified motive for carrying a firearm. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework governing firearms in Mexico? Option A. Rely on informal advice from a friend who has previously obtained a firearm and bypass the official SEDENA application process. Option B. Submit an application with incomplete documentation, assuming SEDENA will request further information if needed. Option C. State a general concern about crime in the applicant's area as the sole justification for the license. Option D. Gather and present specific evidence of threats or professional duties that necessitate armed protection, and submit this documentation with the application to SEDENA. Correct answer is D. Gather and present specific evidence of threats or professional duties that necessitate armed protection, and submit this documentation with the application to SEDENA. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the complex legal requirements for obtaining a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas in Mexico, specifically concerning the necessity of proving a legitimate reason for carrying a firearm. Misinterpreting or neglecting these requirements can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the denial of the license. The professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure all legal prerequisites are met accurately and truthfully. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves diligently gathering and presenting documentation that clearly establishes a demonstrable and legitimate need for carrying a firearm, as stipulated by Mexican federal law governing firearms. This includes providing evidence of specific threats, professional duties requiring armed protection, or other legally recognized justifications. The individual must then submit this comprehensive documentation, along with the application to the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, for their review and approval. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework established by the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, which mandates the demonstration of a justified motive for the issuance of such a license. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that simply stating a general desire for personal protection or a vague sense of insecurity is sufficient justification. This fails to meet the legal standard of a justified motive, which requires specific, demonstrable circumstances, not mere apprehension. This approach risks immediate rejection of the application and potential scrutiny of the applicant's intentions. Another incorrect approach is to submit incomplete or falsified documentation regarding the applicant's background or the alleged threats. The law requires truthful and accurate information. Providing misleading information constitutes a violation of the application process and can lead to severe penalties, including criminal prosecution for fraud or perjury, in addition to the denial of the license. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the advice of an unlicensed individual or to bypass the official application channels. The process for obtaining a particular license for the carrying of arms in Mexico is strictly regulated by SEDENA. Attempting to circumvent these official procedures or seeking guidance from unauthorized sources can result in the application being invalidated and may expose the applicant to fraudulent schemes. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a systematic decision-making framework. First, they must thoroughly research and understand the specific legal requirements outlined in the Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos and any relevant SEDENA regulations. Second, they should meticulously gather all required documentation, ensuring its accuracy and completeness, with a particular focus on substantiating the justified motive. Third, they must submit the application through the official SEDENA channels, adhering strictly to their procedures. Finally, they should seek guidance from legal counsel specializing in firearms law in Mexico if any aspect of the process is unclear or complex, ensuring compliance and mitigating legal risks. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that a firearms dealer in Mexico must accurately calculate the annual fee for a particular license for the carrying of arms. If the federal law of firearms and explosives mandates that this annual fee is equivalent to 15 times the minimum wage for Zone A, and the current daily minimum wage for Zone A, as published by the Comisión Nacional de Salarios Mínimos for the current year, is $248.93 MXN. What is the correct annual fee for this license? Option A, $105,000.00 MXN. Option B, $115,000.00 MXN. Option C, $108,000.00 MXN. Option D, $111,998.50 MXN. The correct answer is D, $111,998.50 MXN. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms dealer in Mexico regarding the calculation of the annual fee for a particular license for the carrying of arms, Licencia particular para la Portación de Armas. The challenge lies in accurately applying the relevant legal provisions and ensuring compliance with the fee structure, which is tied to the minimum wage. Miscalculation can lead to penalties, including fines and potential suspension of the dealer's license, impacting their business operations and reputation. Furthermore, it requires a precise understanding of how the minimum wage is adjusted and applied for fee calculation purposes. The correct approach involves a meticulous calculation based on the current minimum wage in the relevant zone of Mexico and the prescribed multiplier for the annual license fee. Specifically, Article 26 of the Federal Law of Firearms and Explosives, Ley Federal de Armas de Fuego y Explosivos, and its corresponding regulations stipulate the fee structure. The annual fee for a particular license for the carrying of arms is set at a specific number of minimum wages. To ensure accuracy, the dealer must consult the official minimum wage decree published by the National Minimum Wage Commission, Comisión Nacional de Salarios Mínimos, for the current year and the applicable wage zone. The calculation would be: annual fee equals number of minimum wages specified in Law X, current daily minimum wage X 30 days in a month, as fees are often expressed in monthly minimum wages or a multiple thereof. For instance, if the law specifies 10 minimum wages and the daily minimum wage for Zone A is $207.44 MXN, the calculation would be 10 asterisk $207.44 asterisk 30 equals $62.232 MXN. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework governing firearms licensing fees in Mexico, ensuring full compliance and avoiding any underpayment or overpayment. An incorrect approach would be to use the minimum wage from a previous year without verifying the current rate. This fails to comply with the principle of current applicability of laws and regulations, as fees are typically adjusted annually based on economic factors reflected in the minimum wage. Such an oversight would result in an incorrect fee calculation and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate the fee based on a general understanding of previous year's fees without performing the precise calculation. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the specific legal requirements for fee determination. It opens the door to significant errors and noncompliance. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to apply a flat fee that is not derived from the legally mandated calculation based on the minimum wage. This bypasses the established regulatory mechanism for fee setting and would be considered a violation of the law, potentially leading to severe consequences for the dealer. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Identify the specific legal provision governing the fee. 2. Ascertain the current applicable minimum wage for the relevant zone and year. 3. Perform the calculation using the exact figures and multipliers provided by law. 4. Document the calculation process and the source of the minimum wage data for audit purposes. 5. If there is any ambiguity in the law or the minimum wage decree, seek clarification from the relevant government authority.